All right, we'll start with this. Well, Mario Barrios had this to say about that whole Josh Taylor-Gervonta Davis conversation. He said, Josh Taylor is an undisputed champion for a reason. Him and Tank would be a great fight. Not going to say all that, Barrios told BoxingScene.com following his first defeat, you know? Styles make fights. Josh Taylor is an undisputed champion right now for a reason. I mean, if Tank chooses to stay at 140, I think that would be another great fight. I think if he wants, he could definitely stick around at 140, Barrios said. But, you know, that's his decision, ultimately. I think he definitely felt the power. He's a great boxer, Barrios said. He wasn't easy to hit and was the better man tonight. The 26-year-old Barrios isn't certain if he'll remain in the 140-pound division either or move up to welterweight now that he has suffered his first professional defeat. The San Antonio native hopes he enhanced his reputation with his strong showing against the undefeated Davis. I told everybody I would show who the real Azteca is, Barrios said. I hope they were able to see that. I'll be back stronger, smarter, and a better fighter. You know what the sad part about all of this is?
Wasn't a bad fight.
Davis versus Barrios wasn't actually a bad fight. And because this was Gervonta Davis's first fight at 140 pounds, you could have actually forgiven him for choosing an unheralded guy like Mario Barrios. Big, strong kid, unbeaten at the time. Good litmus test for a guy who's just dipping his toe in the pool of the 140-pound division. That if you do away with all the spin from Leonard Ellerbe and all of the overzealous hyperbole from Gervonta Davis's fans, the fight itself wasn't actually a bad fight.
And Mario's not a bad fighter.
He was, however, an unheralded fighter, an unproven fighter at this weight at the highest levels of the 140-pound division. And that's what makes him an off-brand opponent. That at this point, Gervonta Davis either should have or should be fighting more heralded fighters
than Mario Barrios.
The last 3, going on 4 years, we should have seen something a lot more interesting than the Ruizes, the Munezes, the Fonsecas, even the Leo Santa Cruzes of the world. We should have seen something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more high risk in the last 3 or 4 years from Gervonta Davis, and we haven't.
That's the truth.
Mario Barrios serviced as a good litmus test for what Gervonta Davis can do at 140 pounds. He did, but only at a certain level, because Mario only competed at a certain level. He didn't get to the point to where he was fighting former champions like Kirill Rillik and Victor Pistol, Regis Prograrius.
Those ain't the kind of fighters that he fought.
Those upper echelon 140-pounders, those former champions, those top 10, top 5 guys, those ain't the kind of guys that Mario Barrios had fought so far. And because he hadn't fought those kinds of fighters yet, he's only competing at a certain level. And when you beat him, you're only competing at a certain level.
It's not that it's a bad win.
It's not a bad win. And Mario Barrios isn't a bad fighter. But let's not kid ourselves, and let's not blow this out of proportion. The way that Gervonta Davis's pom-pom waving sycophants are trying to blow this out of proportion, that somehow you don't need to fight a Josh Taylor because you just took out Mario Barrios.
That's a lot of spin.
From Leonard Ellerbe, that's a lot of bullshit. If you got time in your day to fight unheralded guys like Mario Barrios, I don't want to hear about how nobody knows Josh Taylor. Nobody knows Mario Barrios, or nobody knew him. And you were okay with that fight. For whatever reason, have an aversion to fighting Josh Taylor.
And that's what fucks it up.
That's why you find a lot of people losing patience with Gervonta Davis and losing patience with his handlers, Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Leonard Ellerbe. Don't try to create this bubble. Don't try to create this environment where somehow beating Mario Barrios is the same as or better than beating Josh Taylor. No, it's not.
Shit, don't fool me.
You think about these other young fighters that are around these weights from 130, 135 to 140. Young fighters like Oscar Valdez, who was a champion at featherweight, moved up to super featherweight to take on a very dangerous guy in Miguel Berchelt. Hindsight being 2020, we know what happened and we know who won. But ahead of that fight, very risky fight for Oscar Valdez, pursuing Miguel Berchelt. Took on some risks in that fight. Think about Teofimo Lopez, who had less professional fights than Gervonta Davis does ahead of that Vasyl Lomachenko fight, but he wasn't guided away from that fight. He wasn't guided away from that match.
He ran towards it.
You see, you can't pretend that those are the kind of fights that Gervonta Davis has been having. He hasn't been having those kinds of fights, and that's why so many people are so critical of him. That maybe you've amassed enough of a following that you can make a little bit of money, sell some cheap seats, you can do that.
Whilst avoiding risky fights.
And if you're happy with where you are right now and you're happy with the kind of money you're making, then be happy and keep doing what you're doing.
It's your prerogative.
But don't think for a second we're going to view you in the same light as a Josh Taylor, a Teofimo Lopez, or even an Oscar Valdez. And we're not. I mean, maybe Kevin Cunningham is super impressed with Gervonta Davis's win over Mario Barrios, so much so that he considers him a pound-for-pound fighter.
But the rest of us don't.
And until he's fighting the Taylors and Lopez's of the world, or at least his career starts to look like theirs, we're not going to view him in that light, no matter how many off-brand opponents he fights or how many Junior Whopper belts he picks up along the way.
What, we're going to minimize what undisputed means so that Davis won't have to fight Taylor?
I mean, don't fucking fight him if you don't want to fight him.
Keep fighting for Reggie belts.
It's a free country. You can do what you want. But until you're fighting guys like Taylor, until you fight guys like Teofimo Lopez, Vasily Lomachenko, just opponents of that caliber, fighters of that bracket, until those are the kind of guys you're taking on,
Beating.
nobody's going to think of you in the same light as them. Maybe you found yourself a niche market that doesn't actually know a whole lot about boxing, and they don't know a whole lot about the 140-pound division, 135-pound division, or the 130-pound division. You found yourself a niche market that allows you to keep making a little bit of money knocking out off-brand guys. Maybe you found that, but finding that market don't make you a pound-for-pound fighter.
Real boxing fans know.
It's gonna take more than Mario Barrios to convince us. In other news, per tweet from Dan Raphael's sources, Triller's making plans for an August 3rd card at Madison Square Garden Theater in New York that would be topped by heavyweight contender Michael Hunter versus Mike Wilson in a WBA eliminator. Fight was originally on Lopez versus Camboso's pay-per-view card June 19th before the show was postponed when Lopez came down with COVID-19. The card would be the first event in New York with fans since the pandemic began. I'm told the card would be on the Triller app, not a pay-per-view.
So boxing's coming back to the Big Apple.
The story is Triller has reached a deal with Madison Square Garden for what's supposed to be a monthly boxing series. Tuesday Night Boxing is coming to New York's Hulu Theater at Madison Square Garden.
What's often referred to as the little room in boxing circles.
Not to be confused with the big room at MSG that could house as much as 20,000 fight fans. The little room houses about 5,000.
The Hulu Theater.
As Triller plans their expansion into the world of boxing, the company has just penned a one-year deal with Madison Square Garden's company to kick off a monthly Tuesday Night Boxing series that will be held at the Hulu Theater entitled Trillerverse. The series will begin August 3rd with heavyweight Michael Hunter facing Mike Wilson in a world title eliminator bout. Chris Algieri will also be back in action in a co-feature attraction against an opponent yet to be determined.
Sidebar.
Even though Michael Hunter's fight with Mike Wilson is being billed as a WBA eliminator, it's not a final eliminator. It's going to move the winner of the fight up the ranks, but don't confuse that with a trinket title fight, because Daniel Dubois is the WBA's interim champion. Trevor Bryan is the WBA's regular champion. Mahmoud Char has been labeled a champion in recess. And Robert Helenius, who's going to be in action on the undercard of Wilder vs. Fury 3 in that rematch with Adam Kopnowski. Robert Helenius is the current reigning WBA gold champion. I don't know what that means. I don't know which belt is better than which. And as we all know, Anthony Joshua, he holds the full version of the title. The real version of it, as it were. The article goes on to say, and just as you might expect from a Triller production, boxing won't be the only attraction on the show, with a planned versus rap battle between hip-hop legends Beanie Sigel and Noriega, which will be featured in the opening installment. All of the festivities will stream live both Triller and Fight TV, with the versus battle to follow the headlining boxing match.
Like Beanie Sigel in that fight.
Unanimous decision. Ryan Kavanaugh was quoted as saying, "We couldn't be more excited to be bringing boxing back to Tuesdays at the Mecca of boxing, Madison Square Garden, combining the excitement and purity of boxing with the innovation and cultural relevance of versus." So what you're going to notice is Hunter versus Wilson might top all the boxing matches set to go down on this card, but Hunter versus Wilson isn't actually the crescendo of this upcoming show. The crescendo, as it were, the climax, what it's all building up towards, is that rap battle between Beanie Sigel and Noriega. The article goes on to read, As far as the production of the show, Triller's top boxing officer, Peter Kahn, will oversee the boxing side of things, with Lou DeBellia serving as the official promoter, while record producers Timbaland and Swiss Beats will manage the versus battle. I think that this will afford an opportunity for many of Lou DeBellia's fighters moving forward. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see some of Lou's girls fighting on some of these cards.
Talked about this in a previous video.
The Triller can afford these other fighters that perhaps aren't fighting on ESPN or Showtime or Fox or DAZN. They might afford other fighters the opportunity to fight on a platform, get them that exposure because they're not tied to anybody else. Lou DeBellia, he's been around for a long time. He's worked with a lot of people, and I could see this
monthly
engagement resulting in several fights for several of his fighters moving forward, because this is intended to be a monthly boxing series.
Tuesday night fights.
And I do get the sense that the people over there at Triller are relying on the music acts to garner more interest than the fights themselves, because Mike Wilson versus Michael Hunter ain't a hot ticket.
It's not.
What Triller appears to be trying to do is to find a happy medium, a bridge between the sport of boxing and popular culture.
Pop culture.
With a side of boxing, as in this scenario, based on what we've read so far, the boxing would be the appetizer to the inexorable versus battle between Beanie Siegel, Desert Eagle, Rap Gorilla, who raps for the Skrilla, and Noriega. Can't put my finger on how much success the people over the Triller are going to have with this, or how much success they're not going to have with this. It's clear that they're not marketing this card towards the conventional boxing audience, the conventional boxing fan, as this is a rather unconventional medium to view the sport.
As far as boxing.
Because you don't have an established stable of fighters yet. You don't have the biggest acts in boxing, as it were. The biggest acts in boxing are all tied to other platforms. Thus, your brand of boxing is more of a decorative item in the background of pop culture events like this upcoming Beanie Siegel versus Noriega rap battle. That the event has the potential to be successful as far as the event overall, but its relevance to boxing and making a splash in boxing, that's what's questioned.
That's what I'm talking about.
You're trying to compete with Showtime, Fox, ESPN, and DAZN by staging fights like Mike Wilson versus Michael Hunter?
Bartender, I'm gonna need something a little bit stronger.
Remember, this is a boxing channel, and what we're addressing here is value for money to the boxing fan. If this monthly boxing series is going to be, what, one card per month or one or two cards per month, you're talking about one or two cards per month at $29.99 a month. That's what the monthly charge would be, unless you go for the annual, which is something like $300. Essentially, you might be able to entice subscribers with your versus battles, those interested in your contribution to pop culture. You might get people to come on board with that, but as far as boxing fans and what boxing fans want to see, as far as boxing fans go, that kind of price tag for that kind of fight, I just don't know.
Let's wait and see what kind of schedule they roll out.
Finally, Rachel Donaire, the wife of Nonito Donaire and manager and trainer, she very recently spoke with Lance Pugmire and stated it was going to continue to be this circus. We already seen how dirty John Riel Casimero's team play, so what else will they play dirty about? Medicals?
It's a valid point.
It's a valid question. You know, boxing fans, they can be fucking idiots. They really can. I mean, I came across a couple of clowns who were accusing Nonito Donaire of being pussy whipped, being soft, by allowing his wife to call this fight off, and they either don't know, don't want to know, or don't understand what the focal point of this fight's collapse was. The fight collapsed because the Casimero people were slow to the punch with the paperwork. That being enrolled in the clean boxing program does not guarantee testing for a fight. More specifically, this fight. The Donaires were willing to pay for the testing for this fight, and all they got was the runaround, insults,
And a lot of tweets from Sean Gibbons.
I think they had from the 23rd to the 26th in order to start the process. Submit the paperwork to start the testing for this fight. And in between that time, all you saw was a lot of back and forth, a lot of insults, which were never necessary to begin with.
It's childish.
The Casimero people didn't decide to finally submit any kind of paperwork for this fight until a lot of things were said, and until 2 hours after the fight had already been called off, 2 hours after the fight was canceled. So when Rachel Donaire raises these questions, They are valid points. They are valid questions. That if you're playing dirty just to submit some paperwork, what are you doing behind the curtain? What are you doing behind the scenes?
Because it never had to come to this.
Enough was already said in full view of the public eye that you can't attribute the fight's collapse to confusion. It was made crystal clear that being enrolled in the clean boxing program, which is randomized testing by way of VADA and the WBC, that's not the same thing as contracting VADA independently for a fight, to conduct the testing themselves for a fight. That's what Rachel and Nonito were talking about. And Nonito, he's developed a reputation over the years as the cleanest athlete in the sport of boxing because he willfully gets tested more than anybody else.
He pays for it out of his own pocket.
So just imagine having to go through all this while your wife and manager is being insulted in full view of the public eye by way of social media over a fight that the other guy needs more than you do. You know, let's not forget who needs who here.
Casimero people really screwed the pooch.
There are some short-sighted individuals out there who think that the focus and the focal point of all of this, the insults levied against Rachel Donaire, when the focus and the focal point was the VADA testing. That's what it was all about. We don't get here if you guys process the paperwork in a timely fashion. We're given a deadline.
You didn't meet it.
We're more concerned with saving face on Twitter. That's where your concern was. So, I mean, I don't know.
About what?
Do the people over there at the PBC decide to go ahead with Casimero versus Rigondeaux? Because that was their original plan. The freaks and the geeks on social media reacted to this news. And as stated, you know, they wanted to accuse Nonito Donaire of being soft, of being afraid of Jonriel Casimero. I don't buy into that theory. Anybody that knows anything about Nonito Donaire knows that this guy don't shy away from a fight, don't shy away from a challenge. And if we got here, it's because the Casimero people cost themselves that fight. That opportunity, I should say, because it was always more of an opportunity for John than it was for Nonito.
The Haymanites are mad too.
They're mad because Nonito Donaire is taking that WBC title elsewhere, in all likelihood over there to the Inui top rank side of things for a unification rematch.
They were hoping that title would stay on PBC Island,
where Al Hyman could hold it hostage and keep it away from Naoya Inoue.
Tough titty bitch!